I'm Ron Patterson with Utah State University Extension in Carbon County. Today we're going to talk about starting your seeds indoors. There may be several reasons for starting seeds indoors. Most of all, it's just kind of fun to do. But also, in our area here in the southeastern Utah high desert country, we don't live in a very high populated area, so we have to travel over the mountain to get our starts, or they may not have the varieties that we want here. And if you've got a big garden, it may just be more economical to start plants indoors. Generally speaking, if you're just going to have 3 or 4 pepper plants and 3 or 4 tomato plants and a couple of cucumbers, then probably economics is not the reason you want to do it. But if you like to have fun, here's one way to do it. One thing you need to consider is which plants do you want to start indoors. Some plants do not transplant well. For example, radishes or carrots do not transplant well. They're better to start outdoors, so we'll save those from when we're planting outdoors. But you can get a jump on the season if you're going to be planting, say, peppers or cucumbers, or you got some squash. There's some summer squash there. There's melons and tomatoes. You can even start, if you want to, you can start spinach and lettuce indoors. Most of these plants will transplant quite well. You just have to schedule out when you're going to be starting them and when you will need to get them transplanted and out into the ground. One of the things that determines when you will transplant these plants, if you're going to do peppers, you need a fair amount of time to get your peppers planted up and growing and transplanted and ready to plant outside. So you want to start peppers 8 weeks before you're ready to plant them outside. Tomatoes, you can do those 4 to 6 weeks before you're ready to plant those outside, probably about 6 weeks. Cucumbers and squashes and melons, I would go about 4 weeks for those before I'm ready to plant them outside. Eggplants are probably along about the same time as peppers, about 8 weeks for the eggplants to come up and get transplanted and ready to plant those outside. So that's kind of the time frame that you're looking at on how early in the season to get these started indoors before you're going to plant them outdoors. Now, certain plants are very hardy, and then certain plants are very tender, and this is regarding frost, how well they'll tolerate the frost. And so things like tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and squash and melons, those are very tender plants. Any frost at all, even sometimes getting down to 35 degrees, you'll get a chilling damage, but you get down to where it's freezing, and those plants do not tolerate that very well. Other plants like spinach and lettuce and cabbage and broccoli, those plants they'll tolerate the frost as long as they've been hardened off correctly before you set them outside. So the climate is kind of what depends how far back you're going to be planting those plants. If you've got a way to protect them, even if it's going to be freezing, like you've got some sort of a frost protection type thing that you use, then you can actually bump it ahead. It's just you need to decide in your own mind when you're going to plant those out. So if I want to get way ahead and plant my tomatoes out in the middle of April and I have good frost protection for them out there, then I will back up from that middle of April date 4 to 6 weeks for planting my tomato plants, getting them started indoors, and then they will be the right size when I plant them outdoors. Your cabbages and things like that, they'll tolerate those frosty days like in late April, mid-April, maybe even early April. And so those plants, you're probably looking at starting them indoors about 4 or 5 weeks before you're going to plant them outdoors. Make sure you get them hardened off, then you can plant them out, and they'll tolerate the cold. The other thing you have to be careful of course, is the wind around here in our southeastern Utah area. We have a lot of really heavy spring winds, so that can be another thing that we have to protect against. But that's how you determine when you're going to start these plants indoors. You don't have to have fancy materials to start things indoors. You can, for example, just take a butter carton and punch holes in the bottom of it. You want to make sure that you've got drainage. Anything that you've got your seeds starting in, you want to have good drainage in. So you can do that, and then you can start your seeds inside that, set it in a window. That will work just fine. Some other things that you'll need to do if you're doing different varieties, you want to have some labels for them. And a real cheap way is to take again a butter carton or something that's got a clear side to it, and you can cut this into labels quite easily if your scissors work, so that cut off the top ring and then the bottom down here. You got a piece of plastic, it's got pretty much white stuff, and then you can just cut those into labels. Good stuff. So I've cut that carton up. I've got lots of tags. You can have a 4-inch tag if you want, or if you want you can make them shorter. I like mine a little bit shorter because I don't need to have that much sticking up above, just enough to let me know what varieties I'm growing. Of course, if you wanted to, you could go to the store and buy labels, but I'm pretty cheap. For the cartons here on the bottom, I've made some holes. You want to make sure you have drainage, so I made 4 about 1/4-inch size holes, and that'll drain out quite well when I'm ready to go with that. So that's kind of the cheap way to do it. If you want to use flats, you can purchase flats at the store. For starting your seeds, you want to make sure that you have a flat that has holes in the bottom, again for drainage. So you want to make sure that you've got that. But if you're starting indoors and you're going to put this on your furniture, you'll probably want to have, in addition to that, a flat that doesn't have holes in the bottom of it, so that your wife doesn't get upset with you, or your husband, if you happen to leak all over the furniture. So you put a flat inside of a flat, you get the drainage, but it also is protecting your furniture from that water. If you want, you can purchase the inserts. They have these numbered based on how many cells. So this is an 804. There's 8 of 4 packs in the flat. They just fit right into the flat like that. But that's not what you typically, I don't have as good a success starting seeds in this. I start the seeds in the flat, and then I transplant them. So what I have here is I have a flat of tomatoes that I started, and they're ready for transplanting. Now how you tell when you're ready for transplanting is you look at these leaves. You have these first 2, what we call seed leaves or cotyledons, are the first 2 leaves that come out on these types of plants. And then you have the first set of true leaves. When these first set of true leaves are about the same size as the cotyledons, then they're ready to transplant. So these tomatoes need to be transplanted, so that's what we're going to do. So as we look at this flat here, we can see that there's a variability in how big they are. You could actually take these that just have the cotyledons showing, like this, and they'll transplant, and they probably will survive quite well. If you take them and you get these too big, the transplant shock may be a little tough on them. They can still survive, but they don't transplant quite as well. They're just a lot easier to handle. They're not quite so tangled in there. If you get them when they're about this size, here, these true leaves, the same size as the cotyledons. When the cotyledons, this true leaf here is just kind of coming out, it'll probably survive. If you want to have a good even crop, you can throw out the little ones. I have a hard time throwing any plants out, but you can throw out these little ones that are just barely starting to come up and germinate late, and then have a pretty even crop of plants in your flat. Another alternative to these inserts that you'd put in the flats would be to just get you a plastic 6-ounce Dixie cup and make the holes in the bottom of that. Again, you need to have drainage. These are pretty easy to just cut the corner out so that you've got drainage out of the bottom of that, and you can use those instead of these inserts. Again, another cheap way, if you don't want to have to buy a whole carton of inserts, you can just buy a package of plastic drinking cups, cut holes in the bottom of those and use those as well. There are different ways you can mark these little labels that we've made here. Crayons would work. They don't fade in the sunlight quite too bad, but they don't stay on. They'll rub off quite easily. There are these China markers or wax pencils that we can use these for, and you can write on your label what plants you're planting there, and those will do quite well. You can also use a Sharpie if you want to. These I've found aren't quite as durable actually as the wax pencils are, so you may want to kind of test around a little bit what you want for labels and for the markers. But these China markers, pretty inexpensive. This material you can get at your local office supply store. You want to use a potting soil that is designed for houseplants, and transplanting is fine. You don't want to use soil from outside. Soil from outside is going to carry weed seeds in it and be a little bit too heavy. You're not going to get the drainage you want, especially if it's soil from our country here in high desert country of Utah. It doesn't work real well. So we want to have good potting soil in here. We don't need to fill the flat full for starting the seeds. Probably about an inch worth of soil, an inch to an inch and a half will be plenty. When we get that soil in here and get it leveled out, smoothed out, and then we'll get our seeds planted. If you're going to do a single variety and plant a whole bunch of one variety, you can just broadcast these over, put a little soil over the top of it, and that's fine. We're going to be dealing with several different varieties, and so what we'll want to do is keep them separate. A good way to do that is to just create some sort of a track along here, and then you can plant those seeds. You don't have to be close, probably about an inch apart is good, but I'm going to have these tracks along here, making that with my pen. Then I'll put the seeds of different varieties, put my labels at each track, and I will know what's growing where, so when I transplant it I can keep them straight. Something you need to be aware of as you're planting seeds, this is a tomato variety that I'm planting. You want to know how deep to plant these tomato seeds. And the rule of thumb is about 4 times the diameter of the seed. Tomatoes you'll plant about 1/4 of an inch deep. If you start getting shallow, more shallow or less deep than that, when those cotyledons come out, sometimes the seed coat doesn't pull off very well. You want to space them within this row, kind of depending on how viable the seeds are. You plant them about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch apart, and you get a good spacing in there. It makes it easier to pull them apart when you're ready to do the transplanting. So I've got my tomato seeds planted all across here, several different varieties. They're all labeled. I'm going to cover them with about 1/4 inch of soil. Different seeds you can plant closer together. You can cover them with less or more soil, or however you want to do it. But you want to make sure that those seeds don't dry out in the germination process. The 3 things you need for seeds to germinate are the proper temperature, moisture, and oxygen. And in some cases sunlight helps with certain plants, but other plants really don't need the sunlight. So we're just going to cover these up, get a good covering on them, and we'll pat it down so we've got good seed contact with the soil. And we'll make sure we got good seed contact, pat that down, soil down. Another thing that I've found very helpful with seeds is to cover it over. You can cover a flat with cling wrap, the saran wrap or whatever brand you use. You can just cover it over the top. You can get those commercial domes that you put over the tops of the flats. If you're going to do it in one of these pots, you can just put your soil in, your seed, and then cover that again with a saran wrap type cover. And that helps it so it doesn't dry out during the germination process. Once those start to germinate and they pull up and I see the seeds coming out, I'll take that dome off because we don't want to have too high of a moisture content and encourage disease problems. But for germination, it's good to keep that covered and moist. So we'll get these watered in now, put the cover on them, and get them ready to start germinating, so we'll have some seeds pop up here in a few weeks. Now to water these in, you need to have moisture in there. I'd like to have my water actually just a little bit warm but not hot. You don't want to get it too hot. You don't want to spray that water too heavily. The stream would wash out, so the spray pattern is better. And then you just lightly run the water over the top of your plants. Again, you don't want to have that water stream so heavy that it's going to wash the soil away and put your seeds in a different spot than what you originally planted them. So don't sit there and gush the water out. Just be careful with it. Let that set, let it drain in the sink. And when it's done draining, or you can do it now, just put that dome over the top, and that will keep that moist and shouldn't have to water that until after the seeds have popped up. So we'll put that in the window. Here's the flat that I just planted. I'll put this in my window. Now, the best window is a good south-facing window. I don't have a good south-facing window, so my choices are east or west. North is probably not a good choice. West is not as bad. East is probably a little bit worse than west, but I've got a west window. It's a pretty good sized window. I get good light in here, but probably not enough. So I built this structure here that I have, and it's got lights that grow on the room side of the plants, and then the windows on the outside of the plants, so that they're getting pretty good light from the windows. They're getting light over the top of the plants here. It's just another expense. If you're going to be starting seeds indoors, you have to make sure you have a good light, good windows. One thing that I will do is every day I'll take these flats and I'll rotate them. And I'll actually rotate them in position as well, so that, like for example, it's a little bit darker on this side and you get a little bit more light on this side because of the angle of the sun. So I'll take this one out and rotate it down there, and I'll rotate these all around up here, take this one up there and rotate these around so that they'll get rotated in position. The plants will grow towards the light, they'll stand up straight, otherwise you'll get these reaching plants. So that's what I do to keep my plants rotated and keep them growing up tall. You need to think about, am I going to have to supply a little bit more light for these plants? Eventually I'll get these outside. I've got a place outside that I can keep them, so it's not always quite this crowded. But this time of year it's always this crowded. So that's how I do my light. You really don't need to have light for tomatoes and peppers and whatnot until after they pop up. So I could put this flat here somewhere else if I'm crowded for space, and eventually then get it moved out. Get this put back in when they'll start to germinate. I can get them into where they'll have light, and that will help them to pop up and grow well. So that's how you handle the light with your indoor planting. So now that I've got these tomatoes are coming up real well, they're looking really good, I'm ready to transplant them into an individual pot. You can put them into pots this big, but they seem to do better if you do them steps at a time. You just have to consider that much more labor, maybe that much more soil. If you're going to get them planted out not too big, these smaller containers would be just fine. Again, here's the cup, the cheapo way to do it, and that works just fine. So lots of different ways you can do it, and they'll be happy and healthy. So you take your plant, you got the roots. When you grab it, don't grab it by the stem. It only has one stem. If you happen to tear a leaf, well, it's got more leaves to take its place, but it's only got one stem. Take a pen or a dibble stick of some sort. That is an actual term, dibble stick, and then plant them in there. Push those roots down a little bit. Now tomatoes you can plant deeper than they originally are in the soil. They will root along the stem. Other plants like peppers and some of these other plants, the cucumbers and the squash, the cabbages, plant them again at the same soil level. So you can put those down, tomatoes down a little bit deeper. If they get a little bit kind of stretched out, then you can do that. So I got that one, had a little bit more soil on there than I wanted to. Take my dibble stick, and I want these to be down quite deep so that they're not quite so tall and lanky when I'm ready to plant them out, so I'll plant them fairly deep. So we'll get this flat of plants planted here, and then we'll let them. It's probably not a bad idea to set them not in direct sun for a day or so that they can get past that transplant shock, and then get them back into the light, because you need to have them growing and photosynthesizing. to get that growth going. And then you've got your flat tomatoes, and when they're the right size, you plant them outside. So there you have it. Just another way to have fun in your garden.